Welcome to the fourth in a series of 5 mental health podcasts in the run where we're talking about the 5 mental health mountains. I'm obviously doing a 5-peak challenge, and so part of this is okay to walk and talk. And we're just going to see where these mental health challenges impact. They may be impacting us personally, indirectly. They may be impacting us because they're impacting our friends or family or those we work with. So I'm your host today, Warren Evans, Chief Exec of Sports Chaplaincy UK, and I'm with my good friend and expert of all things, more or less, Dr. Allan Johnston. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you for your welcome, Warren. Nice to be with you again, and I think we'll limit my expertise a bit. Definitely not all things.
Allan, just explain to our listeners and introduce yourself.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, great to be with you again. I'm Dr. Allan Johnston. I'm a sports psychiatrist, so that means I'm a doctor of mental health, and I do that primarily now in sports. So I work with Team GB athletes, you might think of as Olympic or Paralympic athletes, via the English Institute of Sport. I work with football managers via the League Managers Association, based down at St George's Park. I'm physically based in Leeds. A lot of the time I have a couple of clinics in Leeds. And I'm a number of other things that are also important to me. You know, I'm a dad, I'm a son, I'm a brother. So I'm other things too. But great to join you today and for climbing our 4th of the 5 mountains.
Both of our 5 mountains. So we've looked at depression, we've looked at anxiety, we've looked at addictions, and today we're going to be looking at a more rounded one, but an interesting one called stress/anger. And if you've not had the chance, I'd recommend you go back and listen to those previous podcasts. There's little nuggets in there to help you have a better understanding, and also great places of signposting as well, so that you may find helpful. But today we are going to be looking at stress and anger. And I was a little bit under stress last time we did this for a variety of reasons. But first of all, we hear that word stress as a negative or a positive. Obviously, anger, and I think the only time I've ever heard anger in a positive sense is righteous anger. But generally, anger means, for me, my understanding is lack of control. So why don't you set the premise? What do you mean by stress? What do you mean by anger?
Yeah, great question. First, we should start by acknowledging that these are 2 normal symptoms, normal human emotions. We see anger all of the time. And if you're anything like me, you quite often feel angry in different ways, whether it's frustration or irritation or irritability, or anger kind of progress to become physical anger or violence. So anger is a normal human emotion. We see it in the playground. We see it in our workplaces. You could even, I suppose, make a case for controlled aggression being an important feature of certain sports. There's some very physical sports that we work with, aren't there, around rugby league or boxing, whereby a certain amount of physical presence or anger is an important part of that sport. Stress, of course, again, a very human emotion, human experience. There's a nice definition of stress, which is where stress is where the perceived demands outweigh the perceived supply. So stress is where the way we think about the demands placed on us, the things we've got to do, the roles we've got to perform, the levels we've got to work at, where that exceeds the supply of our resources, how much sleep we've had, our fueling through our eating, our support network. And so in a sense, stress will be feeling overwhelmed when you have more on your plate than you can manage, or the perceived demands outweigh the perceived supply. In that sense, there's a nice model about how we deal with stress, which is we can deal with the demand or the supply or the perception. So we can try to reduce the demands placed on us by having a holiday, reducing our workload, changing the way we work. We can try and increase the supply of our resources, sleep better, eat better, take a break, get some exercise. Or we can change the way that we see the demands and the supplies. Sometimes people under a great degree of stress might have an anxiety called catastrophizing, or making a mountain out of a molehill. You might think of it as, whereby even a small stress can seem like a really big deal. So that's a nice model for stress. The perceived demands outweigh the perceived resources, which means we can change the resources, the supply, the demands, the supply, or the perception.
I like that. That's I'm challenged as I'm listening to that, as at times I've felt stressed, because I hear the common phrase, pressure's good, but stress isn't. But the truth is, for a diamond to be created, it's got to be under a lot of pressure, and it's your, I guess it's, as you've said, it's your focus or how you view pressure, and pressure is stress, and stress is pressure at times, and it's a perception on one level.
Yeah, and we see that a lot in sports, don't we? At the very elite end, our real top athletes will become highly skilled at managing stress and pressure. But sometimes stress and pressure affects people in different ways. I'm thinking of a rugby league player I used to see who'd be perfectly happy playing in front of 25,000 people on a sort of a Good Friday or Easter Monday game. But on a one-to-one interview with the media afterwards, he would feel under a great degree of pressure and stress. And we see that with different levels of anxiety. We've covered anxiety already, but to briefly go back to that, there are two types of sort of phobias that are very common. There's an agoraphobia or social phobia. An agoraphobia, from the Greek word for the marketplace, the agora, means a person that feels stressed in big, noisy environments, the supermarket, the bus station, the train station. And my rugby league player was very happy in front of 25,000 people taking, important decisions. But a social phobia can be an anxiety on one-to-one conversations, speaking to one person, eating in front of people, talking to a small group. And my rugby league player really struggled with that. So stress and pressure, they also affect us each differently, and different people would react very differently to playing in front of 25,000 people or having a one-to-one conversation. And that's quite unique to the individual.
That's an interesting observation, I'm guessing, and certainly from a stress and anger, and again, generally we there's an undercurrent with anger, but obviously it's about how we channel things, isn't it? Because we can get upset, and that can inspire us to do great things against things that are unjust. We stand up for injustice. So just as you talk, how would you determine, or how would you express, or how would you phrase again anger?
Yeah, so I suppose anger comes as a spectrum, doesn't it? There might be, if you like, a helpful side of anger, a controlled aggression in sport, or as you mentioned, a righteous anger, or an emotion that fuels us to change something, either about ourselves or our communities. But we could become frustrated with litter in the street, and that could fuel us to do a litter pick, and that could be a really positive outcome. In the middle, there'll be a sort of day-to-day feelings that we have. Sometimes things do pass. Feelings of anger can pass. Today's news is tomorrow's chip paper, so things can move on. Often, the thing we felt angry about on Tuesday, we've slept on it, and it's Wednesday, and it doesn't quite seem as big of a deal as it seemed the previous day when we're under maybe a whole range of different types of stress. Anger then, of course, can become unhelpful. It can be an unhelpful emotion, and we know from the last podcast it's a problem if it's a problem. So it can cause biological, psychological, social harm. Stress can affect physical health, something as simple as headaches, or more complicated like blood pressure or cardiovascular health. Anger can become an unhelpful emotion for our mental health. Stress, depression, anxiety, anger linked together. And socially, anger could become a social problem. Anger could lead to us affecting our relationships, our employment, our workplaces. Even in sports like rugby league, there's only a certain amount of controlled aggression or anger that's going to be helpful. We also need to have an amount of discipline or control over the anger. And of course, at the extreme end, anger could lead to people committing crimes, violent crimes that would affect not just themselves, but their community and the victim of that crime. So like a lot of things in mental health, it's across a whole spectrum. And I have a nice model, it's called the ABC, whereby we use that to help us all analyze the times that we're angry. So if we've got time, I'll dip into that model of ABC.
Well, we're going to look at this through the lens of sport, but just as you were sharing that, I always what I recall is people use the excuse, I couldn't help myself, or road rage, or I hit someone, but they generally hit someone who's smaller, and they seem to be able to control themselves. When I'm slightly small, I'm bigger than an average bear, let's say I'm 6'4", 18 stone. So when I'm there and someone says I can't help myself, they seem to be able to control themselves and not hit a small lady. But when someone of my size isn't there, they don't have that ability. Why do people say that? Yeah,
well, it's interesting that it reminds me of that book you might be familiar with, The Chimp Paradox. And this book written by Professor Steve Peters, a colleague of mine in sports psychiatry. And I like a lot of aspects of that book, and something to simplify the model, and we're not going to describe it exactly, but to simplify the model, within each of us is our sort of our animal instincts, our chimp, if you like. And our chimp has animal instincts that can be good for our kind of gut feeling about people, our intuition, but the chimp can also want to do things that we would rather not do in terms of relationships or anger or finding resources or possessing things or eating or other behaviors that a chimp would want to do. There's another part of our brain called the human, whereby we want to sort of sometimes inhibit those chimp reflexes and think through a problem and take our time. And the nice thing about this model, it really says that each of us has a chimp inside us. The book asks you to name your chimp. So you're going to have to think of the name for your chimp.
Ice cream, no.
Each of us has a chimp that wants to break out and do things that sometimes are unfair or wrong or unjust or even illegal. And a lot of us also then have like a human part of us that is able to think, calm down, take it easy, let's sleep on that. Maybe that's not the right thing to do. I'm going to have to learn to control my anger. And I suppose in all of us there's this balance of chimp and human. And I guess sometimes a chimp wins. And sometimes a chimp wins in a simple way, that extra packet of ice cream. And sometimes the chimp comes out in some members of society in a really unhelpful or angry way. But what I like about the model is that within each of us there are our animal instincts and then our human sensibilities, and they're sort of in a bit of a battle in each of us with each of our choices.
Yeah, I guess there's a spiritual. He says, "My flesh, my spirit is willing, my flesh is weak," and that's probably something not too far away. So, what are the? I guess we know when someone's angry in that sense, but I guess in sport it doesn't always come out. It can be suppressed. So, what are the warning signs for a coach, a team, a family member to be aware of with these particular issues?
Yeah. Well, today I was thinking about introducing you to a model I would use with coaches or athletes or teams. I think of the what of anger, the how of anger, and the why. I'm going to talk through what, how, and why. First, taking the what. It's good to kind of study ourselves and our own behaviors, or use a model to study another individual. And I use this method called ABC. So ABC stands for antecedents, behavior, consequences. So that looks at the before, the during, and the afterwards of an anger episode. We could each do that. We could look at the last time we were irritable, the last time we had an argument, last time we fell out with our partner, and we could look at the kind of before, during, and afterwards. What was happening beforehand, before I became angry? What was in the build-up? Maybe I was shot of sleep and slept well the night before. Maybe I'd just come home from a long commute. Maybe I was feeling under pressure because of work or home. Maybe it's a bad day of the week for me. It could be the anniversary of a loss or a bereavement. It could be something that anteceded, something that happened before our period of anger. And if we can spot that, of course, we might spot that theme coming. People who've lost a loved one might feel down around Mother's Day or Father's Day, for example, and we can spot patterns. What was happening during the behavior, antecedents behavior? So what do we do when we get angry? Are there any patterns to that? Do we become irritable or tetchy or aggressive or even violent? So what happens during anger? And then what happens afterwards? How do we feel about that? Is it something that makes us feel guilty or remorseful? Is it something that affects our relationships? Sometimes anger leads to more anger. We're having an argument with somebody. Our own anger is likely to make the other person angry. At least there's a fair chance of that. So ABC is a nice model to look at the what, kind of what is happening with that anger. And again, it could be just the last disagreement we had with somebody. What happened before, during, and afterwards? And if we can spot trends beforehand or at the time or spot our feelings afterwards, we can then do things to see anger coming and sort of divert it off that path by studying the before, during, and afterwards of anger. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing, because I guess when people, and certainly when I think of anger, it's like a fire. I guess it blows up and blows out as quickly. But like you say, it has generally can have negative impact and long-term consequences if depending what you're blowing up about and how you express that. Words are powerful, and certainly other things that have damaging effect. So what is anger impact? Obviously, you said before, during, and after, and I'm guessing stress particularly with certain people, so men and women, or certain, we talk about the alpha male. Are there certain people that are prone to high testosterone levels, I'm guessing, who are more prone to anger outbursts, or is it more controlled? Or how do we control these? And what again, when we're looking in from an outside experience, which sports, which individual, type of individual will struggle, and how could we help someone who's potentially struggling in this area?
Yeah. So in my experience, it's really quite individual. It'd be hard, I think, to draw too many generalizations about sports, about people or gender or backgrounds. It'd be really quite individual, I think. But it's about the individual stress that person's under. And coming back to stress and anger, which often link, anger can very often come from a person feeling overwhelmed. Their perceived demands outweigh their perceived supply. There's got too much on their plate. Anger then comes out in very different forms in very different people. But one of the origins would be around stress and mental health. Now, what can we do about it? That leads me on to sort of the how of anger. So I often work with people around assertiveness, and thinking around assertiveness as a skill. Again, on a spectrum, we might think of broadly 3 categories in the way in which we might respond to people. We can be passive, we can be assertive, or we can be aggressive. I think of passive as done to. So people are doing things to, let's say if I'm passive, people are doing things to me. I'm having to go with the flow. I'm having to be passive in my decisions. There might be times when that's appropriate. If we go to a restaurant and you say, what are you having? I might say, well, I'll have what you're having. I really don't mind today. I'll drink what you're drinking. I'll have whatever you're. So sometimes passive is appropriate, but being too passive can affect a person and lead to a kind of an anger that bubbles up.
Is that, would you cast that? Sorry, I'm just interrupting. Because there's a phrase called passive aggressive. Is that something completely different?
No, that would be related. So in the middle, there is assertive, and I'll come back to that. And at the other end would be aggressive, where I think of it as a doing to. A doing to, we might be being aggressive towards other people and imposing ourselves on other people. Again, there might be rare occasions that's appropriate, say within sport. There might be times where we have to become maybe strict or direct as parents. Let's say a child crossing the road, not rushing out for cars. As a loving parent, we might feel worried, frustrated about that. Maybe not angry, but we might assert ourselves, how we speak to the person and how we are direct in our eye contact. We might want to, impose that view about, say, road safety on a child that's learning road safety. Within the middle, there is assertiveness. And in my mind, if a person doesn't have enough assertiveness, they're likely to be in passive or aggressive, or have to flip between the two, passive, aggressive, whereby they're done to, and then so frustrated they're doing to, or both at the same time, they're sort of passive aggressive. But in the middle is this way of approaching, of communicating, a way of influencing called assertiveness. And assertiveness has a number of skills that we can teach and train. And so I would work with people on these skills. They're broadly 5 skills. For a person to be assertive, they need self-belief. So they have to believe in what they're about to assert. So they have to back themselves and believe that what they're saying is right or fair or just. The next, I call it the 3 C's: calm, confident, and clear. The person's communicating something assertively, they need to remain calm, they're not aggressive, but they need to be confident, they're not passive, and they need to be clear in what they're trying to say. So really saying what you mean and being clear, calm, confident, and clear. Empathy, maybe surprisingly, is a really powerful assertiveness skill. Being able to understand the other person's perspective, whether that's in a negotiation or an influencing conversation or communication, understanding and communicating your understanding of the other person's opinion. I can see how you feel about this because of X, Y, Z, but, and then you kind of assert yourself. So giving away something in a conversation and empathizing, communicating that. The next assertiveness skill is called I statements. I as in the letter I, like iPhone. And people who are assertive, they make I statements. I want, I'd like, I need. And they use I as a way of asserting what they feel needs to happen, rather than we, or maybe we should, I wonder if we could. People, when they're being assertive, might use I statements. And then finally, there's persistence. Sometimes to be assertive, you just have to persist. You have to repeat yourself. If it's worth saying once, maybe it's worth saying twice. So I think of these as assertiveness skills: self-belief, calm, confident, clear, empathy, I statements, persistence. When we can teach and train these skills to help an individual communicate their needs in a relationship or in a workplace or in a team sports environment, so they don't spend too much time being passive or aggressive or passive aggressive, but can be assertive and communicate their needs, which is easier said than done. But those are the skills that we might teach and train in a person to help with anger and to change it into assertiveness.
And when you look at that, and I love that process. And again, you'll say everyone's individual. I know you're going to say this, but in that process of, let's say, someone is either aggressive or too passive, what's that journey look like?
Yeah. So it follows a period of learning and training. And in a sense, it will be a lifelong period of learning and training. When someone's working with me, we often have a limited time together, which relies on, availability, time, funding, the ebbs and flows of the season in different sports. And so a person will have a number of weeks or months working with me, or individuals like me. And so we can teach and train things. There's a therapy called CBT that often is effective in 6, 8, 10 sessions therapy around anxiety or anger. And teach and train these skills. If you think of it like these 5 skills: self-belief, calm, confident, clear, empathy, I statements, persistence, there are some things that you're naturally good at, and there are other things that need a bit of work. So I'd often get a person to score themselves across these 5 traits. I say, think of your last disagreement or argument. Let's score you. How was your self-belief going into that conversation? What would you give yourself out of 10? Calm, confident, clear. How would you score yourself out of 10, etc.? And there'll be things that you're naturally good at. I find you to be naturally very empathetic, for example. And you're pretty persistent. You've got me to do this 5 minutes. But there might be things that we all are less good at. Maybe you could work on your self-belief, or maybe you're very calm, but you could work on your confidence, as an example. And so we'll all sit somewhere in that, myself included, and it might be a matter of assessing where we are across these assertiveness skills, and then spending a number of weeks or months, or sometimes a lifetime, in practicing these skills, practicing self-confidence or self-belief, practicing remaining calm when we're feeling frustrated, practicing empathy if it's a skill that we don't naturally use. And yeah, you could see it as a lifelong pursuit in communicating and influencing our own needs, hopefully for the better, for the good of our families and communities, using assertiveness as an alternative approach to anger and aggression, or being overly passive.
I think that's really helpful, and I'm sure I'm finding it helpful, so I'm sure other people will find it helpful. As we look through this lens now into elite sport, and I'm conscious of time, but as we look through the lens, and you've already said that anger and stress, and it's not a one thing fits a certain sport or a certain individual, but how do you navigate? Let's say someone has, and again, it's a perception. Someone could say they're assertive, and you could say, you're leaning on being aggressive in that sense. And that's, especially in a team environment, maybe on an individual, you've probably got more lenience because you're only impacting yourself and your own performance. But when you're in a team environment, that assertiveness or over assertiveness, i.e. becomes aggressive, then impacts others around, or can impact others around you. So how would a coach, what advice you would give to a family member or a team member or a coach to say, you're just stepping over the line a bit here?
That's interesting. I suppose we could, as you said, it's a problem if it's a problem. So it could affect the team around us in any workplace, in any church or chapel, in any family environment. A bit like that step care model, we want to kind of self-monitor. We'd want to be able to support friends and colleagues. There might be other steps on that in terms of treatment of mental health problems. What occurred to me as you're talking, and what I think is true, is that those assertiveness skills, they're influencing skills. And so in helping someone with their anger, we could use assertiveness skills to help with that person's anger or assertiveness. So, of course, if we're communicating something with somebody around, say, their anger, we would want to listen and understand and empathize, and not just think about what a person's doing, but why they're doing it, what pressure they're under, what stress they're under, demand and supply and resources. We would want to approach the situation ourselves calmly, but confidently and clearly. So those are certain skills. I think they're useful skills for a range of strategies, whether it's speaking to a loved one, buying a house, or helping somebody with their anger. Assertiveness, I think, is a range of skills that can be practiced and developed. And we might approach a person who's having issues with their anger, for anger is a problem. We want to approach them in a calm, confident, empathetic, assertiveness approach. And of all of the things I've just said there, I think maybe understanding why a person is doing what they're doing. Perhaps the last model to introduce today before we finish is thinking about the why of anger. Nobody is born bad. We tend to be the product of our environments. Some anger is quite justified, as we said at the beginning. And so I want to understand why a person's feeling angry. And I would use something called the bathtub model of stress. I'm going to introduce the bathtub model, our final model of today, the bathtub model of stress. In this model, you might think about your bathtub at home, in your bathroom, and you would think about stress as the water in your bathtub. We all have a certain capacity for stress. Sometimes it feels like we're up to here, underwater, or the stress is about to flow out onto the bathroom carpet. And in this bathtub model of stress, we think about the things that are affecting the flow of stress into or out of our life. So I would ask a person 4 questions. Number 1, what is the tap? So that means what puts stress into your life? What causes stress to come into your life? It might be a gradual sort of drip, drip, drip of an unhelpful commute or long commute, or the roadworks at the M1, M62 junction, not personal. That could be a regular stress. It could be a big dose of stress, like a big bucket load of stress, or a big life event. So what puts stress into your life? Question 2, what is the plug hole? What takes stress out of your life? Have you found talking or sharing or breathing or mindfulness or exercise is a helpful method of dealing with stress? So how do you take stress out of your life? And the first 2 questions are sort of day-to-day stress. What puts stress in? What takes stress out? In this model, there are also what we call rocks in the bathtub. There are things taking up capacity, which are our past issues, the baggage that we carry around from our upbringing. And sometimes there might be a past issue, a loss, a trauma. It can be something in the back of our mind. It can be a small pebble, or it can be a great big boulder. But sometimes there are things in our life that we haven't dealt with, maybe we haven't talked about, and they're taking up the capacity for stress. If you imagine a big rock in your bathtub, you'd have a lot less capacity for the day-to-day stress of the water levels. The bigger the issues are, or the more rocks you're carrying around in your bathtub. And then finally, question number 4, we might think about the size of the bathtub. Some of us have a small wash basin of a bathtub, and any stress seems to make us feel overwhelmed. Some people have a bath, or a large bath, or a jacuzzi bath. And we have different levels of capacity for stress. And we often grow our capacity for stress, known as resilience. We grow resilience by going through tough times and learning from ourselves, learning about those tough times, learning about ourselves by surviving adversity, recovering from difficulties, learning about how we bounce back. And so question 4 I ask people is, are there times in your past whereby you've gone through difficult times and you've managed to learn about yourself or learn about how to manage stress, and actually the size of your bathtub, your capacity for stress, grew? So that's a good way of understanding why a person is angry, not just what they're doing, but why they're doing it. What has put stress into their life? Do they have enough methods for taking stress out of their life and pulling the plug hole? Are they carrying around a big rock in their bathtub that's just taking up capacity, or lots of sort of small rocks? And have they had a chance to learn from their experience and grow their capacity for stress? Because it's my belief that, behind a lot of angry people will be a person that's struggling and trying to learn and trying to manage. And sometimes we all need a bit of help.
Well, that's a great place to finish, Alan, with that bathtub model, and that we want to see the best in people and we want to try and help people. So we've been looking at anger and stress today, and that's been really helpful. Some great tools, some great models there that people can look at. Again, if you've got significant issues, we're more than happy if you email us at admin@sportschaplaincy.org.uk, and we'll either help you or signpost you to appropriate support, and people will be able to help you in your journey to be a better person in that sense, and hopefully a better life. So you've been listening to Warren Evans and Allan Johnston on the 5 mental health mountains of the 5 peak challenge. It's okay to walk and talk. If you've not been able to listen to our previous podcast, please do so. They're really helpful on depression, anxiety and addictions, and today was anxiety. We wish you a great day and take care.
Thank you.